She thought she was untouchable until one rainy night, a stranger behind the wheel saw straight through her. Every detour with him pulled her closer to a truth she'd spent her whole life outrunning.
Her phone said the wait would be 6 minutes. Of course it would. It was a Friday, the city pulsing with weekend nerves, thunderstorms stacking like bruised peaches over the lake. Nicolette Baxter, Nico to those who feared her, Nicole to the very few she let close, shifted under the awning of the bar where her team had just celebrated another quarter of dominance. She'd signed 2 clients this week alone. Her boss had toasted her with whiskey he pretended to like. People laughed when she spoke, the way they do when power enters a room. Rain slicked the street, making each passing headlight bleed into a ribbon. The Uber app drew a neat little car toward her pin. Aiden, Toyota Camry, 4.98. She twitched at the rating, perfect enough to be suspicious. She checked her reflection in the window. Eyeliner sharp, ponytail tight, that blazer she could wear like armor. A drunk guy in a Cubs hoodie bumped her shoulder and muttered an apology that sounded like a dare. She ignored him. The Camry pulled up, clean, modest, humming instead of roaring. The driver leaned across to pop the lock. "Nicolette?" he asked. The voice was steady, warm. She slid in, savoring the espresso smell, the faint jazz spilling from low-volume speakers. He was black, early 30s maybe, with close-cropped hair and a daylight-warm smile somehow alive even in night rain. "Aiden," he said, glancing at her in the mirror. "Nice to meet you." He pulled out into traffic with an ease she recognized from boardrooms, the competence of someone who knows every variable and trusts himself to handle it. She checked her email, fingers a blur of habit. He didn't push conversation. He didn't perform. 2 green lights in a row, tires whispered over puddles. "You can charge your phone if you want," he said, nodding toward the cord. She hadn't noticed hers was at 7%. It annoyed her to need something. "Thanks," she said, plugging in. "How's your night?" "Storms bring people out or keep 'em in. Either way, I get stories." "Do you like stories?" she asked. It came out sharper than she intended. He laughed under his breath. "I like people more than they like themselves. Stories are just how they explain the parts they're not ready to touch. And what do you think my story is?" She didn't know why she asked, only that she wanted a better game than email and rain. He met her eyes in the rear view. The city cast a wash of neon across his cheek. Thunder walked along the lake. "You're trying to outrun a sentence you wrote about yourself a long time ago. It used to protect you. Now it's a cage." She blanked. "That's some kind of Uber driver script?" "No script," he said, then added kind. "I could be wrong." She felt the smallest crack open like a stitch pulled by accident. It irritated her. "I'm an executive at Jensen & Walsh. I don't do cages." "Okay," he said, not correcting, not flinching. The car moved through River North, past a couple arguing under a crooked umbrella. He switched lanes like a dancer changes partners, smooth, precise. Her phone chimed, "Mom." She ignored it, then watched her thumb hover, hateful at the way muscle memory still wanted to answer. Aiden noticed and didn't pretend he hadn't. "Tough night?" he asked. "Just a night," she said. "Do I look like a disaster?" "You look like you're holding your breath." She almost told him to cut the therapist act, but another crack opened where her anger might have lived. He turned onto her block, a line of glass doormen and clever hydrangeas that didn't know Chicago winters. "Here you go," he said, easing to the curb. She reached for the handle. "How'd I do?" she asked, meaning the implicit game they'd played. 5 stars, he said. "You took the charger." She smiled despite herself. "You're not wrong." She tapped him 5 stars, added a tip that felt like a dare, and was halfway out when a sudden clap of thunder darkened everything to ink. The car lights flickered, the street lights died, a wave of black rolled down the block. "Whoa," he said softly. The city lost its hum and found a hush. From down the street came a cry, sharp, panicked. Then another. Someone shouted for help. Nicolette froze, half in, half out of the Camry's warm cave. Aiden's eyes flicked to her in the mirror, question and offer in one glance. She had spent years stepping back from messes, delegating chaos. Leaders stayed dry. She let her heels settle back inside the car. "Go," she said. "Please." He didn't hesitate. He pulled away from the curb and glided toward the sound, wipers frantic, rain blistering the windshield. The city had gone primitive, horns distant, sirens late, everyone's small animal fear suddenly awake. They turned the corner and found a small sedan nose-kissed into a street light that wasn't lit anymore. The driver's side airbag was a limp oval. A young woman pounded the wheel with the heel of her palm. Water poured in the open window. "Hey," Aiden called, braking. "You okay?" "My kid," she gasped, pointing to the back seat. The shadow of a toddler car seat loomed like a question mark. Nicolette didn't think. She threw open her door and ran into the rain. Her heels betrayed her. She went barefoot in an instant, blazer flaring, ponytail unspooling. Aiden was there already, opening the back door, cooing to a child with a voice like steady hands. "We got you. We got you." The little boy was crying. Nicolette reached for him and felt his heat, his damp curls against her cheek, the plastic buckles cold as coins against her wrist. "I'm right here," she said, the words surprise in her own mouth. "You're safe." Aiden freed the last latch and lifted the child out, handing him into Nicolette's arms without ceremony. The boy tucked against her as if he'd been doing it all his life. The mother sobbed into her hands, relief collapsing her shoulders. "Thank you," she said over and over. "It went dark and I—" Aiden checked her pupils with his phone's light, asked calm questions, called 911 with minimalist clarity. Nicolette stood in the rain, a child pressed to her heart, and felt something swerve inside her, a lane change she hadn't signaled. The storm drummed harder, then eased, like the city exhaling. By the time an ambulance shouldered through the chaos, the power grid hiccuped back to life. Street lights blinked on, revealing the wet confetti of leaves, the dumb, stunned faces of bystanders returning to themselves. The paramedics took over. The boy reached for Nicolette's hair tie and snapped it, laughing a watery laugh that hit her with a bright ache. Aiden closed the Camry's trunk after lending a small emergency kit. He caught Nicolette's eye. Neither spoke. The mother hugged them both, sobbing gratitude into Nicolette's damp blazer. Back in the car, everything felt changed. Aiden handed her a clean towel from somewhere. She dabbed at her face, aware of mascara she never let smear. He put the car in park at her building again. The doorman, who had watched without moving, finally waved, late to his own story. "Thank you," she said, voice thinner than she liked. "Good night, Nicolette," he said, as if the night were a place they could return to and find the same door. She almost asked him something reckless. Instead, she stepped out, barefoot on cold stone, hair falling like a surrender flag down her back. Upstairs alone, she stood at her window and watched the lake bite at the shore. She had always believed she was better because she survived better, because she ran faster, because she'd never let need show in her eyes. But the feel of a child's weight had put a hand to the lock she didn't know she'd been guarding. Her phone buzzed with emails. She opened the Uber app without thinking. "Aiden," she typed, into the message driver field, but stopped. What could she possibly say? "Thank you for making me touch something true. Thank you for not being impressed by me." Instead, she booked another ride for the morning, 7:10 a.m., the time she never used because she liked arriving places already in motion. As the screen confirmed, thunder rolled back over the city like a promise of more weather. She didn't sleep. She pictured his hands on buckles, his voice soft and sure, the way he said her name like it was a place he'd been. When dawn finally pulled itself up out of the lake, she was ready to drive into whatever came next with her eyes open.
By morning, Chicago wore last night's storm like a rumor. Street gutters still tattooed with leaves, the air washed clean. Nicolette chose flats and a softer blouse than usual, then scowled at herself for noticing. She told herself it was about practicality, not the way some part of her wanted to send a signal even she couldn't read. Her 710 pinged. Aiden, Toyota Camry, the same small lift in her chest. She took the elevator down with a dog walker who wore headphones like armor. The doorman avoided her eyes. Aiden pulled up, windows down to let in the river-washed air. He held the eye contact a beat longer than a rider owes a rider. "Good morning," he said. "You look more awake today. Is that your polite way of saying I looked like a drowned rat last night?" He smiled. "I was going to say you looked like someone who did something brave." She felt heat rise and made a face at the windshield. "Please, the kid did the hard part." She buckled in. "East Loop, Jensen and Walsh," she said, then added, "unless you're planning on detouring to save more toddlers." He signaled, pulled into traffic. "We can detour if you need to." She hesitated. "I don't detour," she said automatically. "Then what would that even mean?" He considered.
Coffee by the river before everyone starts pretending their calendars are cages. She opened her mouth to say she had a call at 8:15, a pre-brief before an 11 o'clock with a client who liked to test if she'd bend. Then she surprised herself. 10 minutes, she said. No more. He didn't grin like he'd won something. He just turned left 2 blocks early and slid into a spot near a little coffee stand that had survived 5 CEOs and 3 recessions. He parked, stopped the trip timer. Off the meter, he said. I'll start it again when we head to your office. You'll lose money, she said, baffled and slightly annoyed that it mattered to her. I'll gain a mission, he said softly. To convince you the morning belongs to you, not your inbox. They walked to the river, coffee steaming into the hiccuping sun. A jogger passed with a dog whose ears requested a handshake from everyone. Aiden leaned on the railing. I'm glad you messaged, he offered. I didn't, she said, surprised into honesty. I almost did. That counts. He glanced at her. You thought about making an opening. She traced a wet ring on her cup lid and resisted the urge to account for herself. What's your story, then? You said you like people more than they like themselves. Who taught you that? My mother, he said, no hesitation. She worked nights at the hospital, days at church, and still made time to sit with anyone who told the truth. Truth got you fed in our house. He smiled, a small brightness. Driving lets me meet people who don't realize they're hungry yet. You make it sound noble, she said, careful not to let respect show too easily. It's practical, he said. Some people need a ride. Some people need a witness. Sometimes it's the same thing. And what do I need? He looked at the river a long time before answering. A name you don't have to earn every morning. Something in her chest tugged, a kite string she'd been holding in a storm. She thought of the way her mother used to say Nicole, like a verdict. Be the best because the world will try to make you beg. She thought of the client today, of the way she would weaponize calm and make them sign anyway. She thought of the tiny hand in her hair last night, the shock of being needed without negotiation. My father used to say love is leverage, she said, surprising herself again. Don't give anyone leverage and no one can move you. He breathed in. And what if love isn't a crowbar, but a door? She laughed because the alternative was dangerous. You should write a book of Uber proverbs. Maybe I'm just talking to you. And this time his eyes didn't look away. They stood like that for the remainder of her 10 minutes, which she noticed without scolding herself, became 14. When they got back in the car, she felt the day differently, like she had rearranged something on a desk, and suddenly the rest made sense. He restarted the trip, and filtered them into the loop's slow churn. Do you drive full-time? She asked. For now, he said. I'm saving to open a small studio. Music, conversation, community. A place where single moms can drop in, where teenagers can record their songs for free, where old men can sit and talk about baseball like it's scripture. She swallowed around a sudden knot. That sounds good, she said. It will be, he said, with a matter-of-factness that made her want to believe in things again. What about you? Is there a version of your life that has something soft in it? I don't do soft, she said gently. I do sharp. I cut through. You did soft last night. She watched the stoplights, tried to compose a retort, then gave up. I did, she admitted. The confession felt like putting a fragile cup on a table and trusting it not to tip. At her building, he didn't rush to end the ride. You'll do great with your client. Try not to leave yourself behind while you win. She paused with her hand on the door. You don't know what winning looks like in my world. Maybe you don't either. And he said it with kindness. In the elevator, her reflection looked less armored than usual, and, she hated to admit, more alive. The morning sprinted her way anyway. Pre-brief, a crisis at legal, a junior associate crying in a stall that smelled like eucalyptus. Nicolette handled it all with the old finesse, but the river coffee sat under her sternum like a quiet yes. At 11, the client tried to walk her around a price drop with compliments that sounded like a trap. She held the line without cutting herself, and when the contract came back signed, she didn't feel the usual high. She felt tired. She told herself it was because of the storm. At lunch, her mother called. You're coming for Sunday dinner, Mrs. Baxter said, making invitation an order. I'm making the roast you like. I'll try, she said, and heard the old calculus rise, debt and duty, and the ledger no one saw and everyone obeyed. Mom, do you remember when you told me love is leverage? You're sentimental, her mother said briskly. Are you seeing someone? No, she said, because she had no category for what Aiden was, because she was afraid of naming anything too soon. I have to go. She worked until 8, not because she needed to, but because stopping meant thinking. When she finally dragged herself toward the elevator, her phone pinged a push notification. Power outage caution tonight, scattered storms possible. Her chest tightened with a feeling too close to hope. Outside, she ordered a ride more out of hunger than logistics. The app spun. Aiden, Toyota Camry. When he pulled up, the city felt like it was leaning in to listen. Dinner? He asked, reading her face. There's a soul food spot 3 blocks off route where the cornbread could make a bishop swear. I don't do weekday dinners, she said, and then almost immediately, let's go. He grinned, the kind of smile that opens doors you didn't know were locked. He turned down a street that smelled like garlic and rain. Inside the restaurant, the owner greeted Aiden by name and hugged him with a maternal ferocity that made something in her bones ache. They ate slow, greens and cornbread and chicken with skin crisp enough to count as a sacrament. Aiden asked questions that didn't feel like tests. She told him about the first time she pitched to a room full of men who decided her mouth meant she was dangerous. He told him about the time he learned the hard way that quiet is not the same as peace. When they stepped back into the night, thunder was practicing somewhere inland. Aiden walked her to the car door but didn't open it for her, because he'd noticed she liked to open it herself. Detours, he said softly. You survived one. I didn't die, she said, dry, and he laughed. Tomorrow, my cousin's DJing in Bronzeville. Outdoor set, neighbors dancing, kids running with sparklers if the rain holds. It's the kind of night that makes a city feel like family. You should come. She almost said no out of reflex. She almost said she'd check her calendar, as if life requires permission slips. Instead, she said, text me the address. He raised an eyebrow. Text? I may have found my own detour, she said, feeling reckless and right. Give me your number. He did, then watched her type, then watched her look up, as if the skyline had been rewritten. See you tomorrow, Nicolette. See me, she echoed, surprising herself with how much she wanted exactly that.
Bronzeville on a storm-threat Saturday is a mood. Porch lights like constellations, grandmothers in folding chairs holding court over plastic plates of ribs, teenagers practicing dance battles on sidewalks like stages. The rain stayed respectful, slung across a sky that couldn't quite make up its mind. Heat rose off the pavement like a second rhythm. Nicolette parked 2 blocks away and walked in flats, a soft dress she would never have worn to River North. She felt eyes on her and didn't flinch. She felt welcome and didn't argue. The music found her before she found the park, a stitched-together miracle of old soul and new joy, bass thick enough to catch your heart and ask it to dance. Aiden stood near the DJ table, laughing with a boy who wore headphones too big for his small head and a confidence that fit just right. When he spotted Nicolette, his face opened. She hadn't realized how much she'd been bracing for indifference until relief made her lighter. You came, he said over the music. I did, she said, letting the words be simple. He introduced her to everyone like she'd always been coming, to his cousin Kai, whose hands danced over the mixer like he was knitting weather, to Mrs. Ellison, who ran the community garden and hugged Nicolette so hard she learned something about being held, to Jamal, the boy with headphones, who told Nicolette he wanted to grow up to be a sound. Aiden moved between people with that same competence she'd clocked in the car, but here it read as care. He didn't dominate a room, he tuned it. They danced. She pretended not to know how, and then let her shoulders remember college before ambition became choreography. A little girl offered her a sparkler and said, solemn, "You look like a princess who forgot she can run." Nicolette laughed until tears surprised her. Aiden watched, not making it a spectacle, simply memorizing her face like a private vow. Later they slid onto the curb with plates of food. "This is what I want to build," Aiden said, nodding toward the boy with headphones showing a toddler how to bounce on beat. "A room where the music is just a pretext for us being good to each other." "You say it like it already exists," Nicolette said. "It does," he answered. "Not mystical, just sure. It exists every time someone says, "You belong." She thought of her office where belonging was conditional on performance. She thought of the little girl's sparkler. She thought of Sunday dinner with her mother, a roast that tasted like duty, a house lined with framed achievements like proof against poverty. "You should meet my mother," she said impulsively, then startled at her own mouth. "Sunday dinner, if you'd want to." He blinked. "That's fast." "So is rain. We're not made of paper." He considered, then nodded. "I'd like that." They ate. They walked to the garden where Mrs. Ellison showed them tomatoes like jewels. Aiden brushed soil off a leaf with a tenderness that did something treacherous to Nicolette's pulse. He mentioned his studio again, the funds still short, the landlord slow-walking a lease. She found herself calculating budgets in her head, seeing a line item labeled, "What if we built something kind?" When the first fat drops finally fell, nobody ran. The kids shrieked and turned their faces up. The music kept going, then doubled, rain drumming a counterpoint on picnic tables. Aiden took Nicolette's hand. Not a question, not a command, a statement. "I'm here." She laced her fingers through, the gesture like a key turning. Around them, the city looked less like a machine and more like a living thing breathing in the weather. "Do you think you're better than everyone?" Aiden asked suddenly, and she almost slapped him until she saw the mischief in his eyes. "I used to," she said, choosing truth. "But now I think I've been scared everyone would figure out I'm not. You're allowed to be good without being alone. They're not opposites." Lightning scribbled light on the underbelly of clouds. She stared at his profile in the quick bright. "Kiss me," she said, surprising them both. He kissed her, soft as a covenant, careful like a man who knows breakable when he sees it. The kiss tasted like rain and cornbread and laughter she hadn't spent yet. When they parted, her world didn't rearrange so much as refocus. The sharp lines were still there. She could see them more kindly. They didn't sleep together that night. He drove her home with the windows down, silence easy, their hands occasionally finding each other and then pretending to be surprised. At her door, he kissed her again, and she exhaled the part of her that always planned her escape route. "Tomorrow," she said, reckless now with hope. "Dinner. My mother." He smiled. "I'll bring flowers. Bring yourself." She watched him leave like you watch a favorite line in a book you can't believe you get to keep reading.
Mrs. Baxter's house had a way of making you feel examined and made of glass. The furniture was immaculate in the way of rooms saved for guests the family never had. Photos lined the walls in ascending order: elementary school valedictorian, high school track star, college honor cords, law school acceptance letter. She hadn't gone. Love as a ledger. The roast smelled like her childhood, which is to say, like expectations. Aiden wore a navy shirt and carried sunflowers wrapped in brown paper. He looked around the living room like a man evaluating weather, respectful, alert, unafraid. Mrs. Baxter took the flowers and set them in water with brisk efficiency, before asking Aiden what he did for a living. "I drive," he said, "and I'm building a community studio." "Drive," Mrs. Baxter repeated, like she was rolling a pearl to check for flaws. "As in Uber?" "Yes, ma'am." She hummed a non-committal note that had made Nicolette sit up straight since she was 5. They all sat. Grace was said in the tone of a closing argument. The roast was tender. The tension was not. "So," Mrs. Baxter said to her daughter, "your firm is in the paper again. High-profile clients. Good for you." Her eyes flicked to Aiden. "Nicole has always been above average." "Mom," Nicolette said, a warning. Aiden touched her knee under the table. The gesture said, "I'm here," not "go easy." "I think above average is a courtesy title for women who intimidate men," Aiden said lightly. "Nicolette is exceptional." Mrs. Baxter's eyebrow climbed a rung. "And how would you know in the short time you have known her?" "Because she tells the truth when it costs her. Because last week she ran barefoot in the rain to help a stranger's child. Because she scares people into being bigger than they were when they woke up." Silence held for a long beat. Nicolette, who had always translated compliments into data, let this one land as nourishment. Her mother set down her fork with the softness of a controlled explosion. Nicole runs towards things she thinks she can fix, she said. She does not do detours. We're trying an experiment, Nicolette said, surprising herself with the use of we. I'm not a lab, but I have a hypothesis. Which is, Mrs. Baxter asked, voice cool as stainless steel. That being loved might not make me weak. Mrs. Baxter's face moved, and for a heartbeat, the mask slid and Nicolette saw the terror that had built the house. The nights her mother had counted rent money twice. The memory of a husband who left a note that said he was sorry to disappoint with his ordinary heart. Weakness is a luxury, but it sounded like a story she wasn't sure she believed anymore. Aidan stood to help clear plates. Mrs. Baxter told him to sit. He ignored her in a way that registered as respect rather than defiance. In the kitchen, he washed dishes while Nicolette dried. She's testing me, he said quietly. She tests everyone, Nicolette said, including me. I don't have to pass. I just have to show up. They returned to the table with cobbler. Mrs. Baxter asked Aidan about his studio, and he spoke plainly about funding and dreams and a landlord who had begun to drag his feet. He told me last week he's considering another tenant, a vape shop with cash on hand. You should have a lawyer, Mrs. Baxter said, a good one. Nicolette looked at her mother like she'd been given a map. She said, I am a good lawyer. You're a rainmaker, Mrs. Baxter corrected. Hire a good lawyer for him. The way she said him contained a reluctant acceptance, like a small door opened and guarded. After dinner, they walked in the small park near the house. The light pooled under street lamps the color of tea. Thank you, Nicolette told Aidan, for not flinching. I brought sunflowers as a peace offering to the part of the world that believes survival is a religion. She laughed and the sound echoed off swings. He kissed her under a tree whose leaves flickered like hands clapping. I can help with the lease, she said against his mouth. My firm won't represent the studio, we have conflict issues, but I can point you to someone fierce. And, if you let me, I want to invest. He stepped back, studying her face like a score he didn't want to misread. Invest or rescue? Build, she said, with you. Not above you, not around you, with. He nodded slowly. We'll write the rules together. They did, over the next weeks, in text threads and kitchen tables, in car rides and stolen lunches. The lawyer she recommended burned the landlord with polite fire until terms were fair. A GoFundMe Aidan's cousin set up bloomed like peonies. Nicolette quietly added a sum that made her chest shake. They picked a name, the listening room. At work, her client portfolio rose like a graph with meaning. But the story felt different now, each win less like a brick in a fortress and more like a beam in a bridge. Her team noticed she said we more. The junior associate who cried in the eucalyptus stall started laughing louder. Her boss said, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. One Friday, walking out of the office into a buttery dusk, she got a call. Mrs. Baxter, the ER nurse said, voice too calm. Aidan was in a minor accident. He's okay, but they asked us to call you. Her mouth went dry. She was already moving, already ordering a ride she hoped would be his, already pushing through a crowd that didn't know they were in her way. In the hospital room, Aidan sat on the bed, a bandage above his brow, eyes bright with pain he couldn't be bothered to dramatize. What happened? She asked, sitting too close as if proximity could barter with fate. A guy ran a red. He clipped me. I'm fine. He reached for her hand. I told them to call you because you're the person I trust to tell me the truth about whether I'm okay. She pressed her forehead to his and exhaled a prayer she didn't know she knew. You're okay, she said, but you're not allowed to scare me like that. He kissed her knuckles. We're opening in 2 weeks, he said, because that's who he was, a forward motion with a heart. Promise me you'll stand in the doorway with me. I'll build the doorway with you. and she meant it like a vow. The night of the opening felt like a heartbeat, the kind that comes before a first kiss, before a verdict, before a storm breaks open. Bronzeville glowed under a honey-colored dusk, the air warm enough to remember summer, but cool enough to make people linger outside with their arms folded against the breeze. The street outside the small brick building pulsed with anticipation. Neighbors in lawn chairs staking their spot, kids chasing each other between the parked cars, the faint smell of ribs drifting over from a nearby backyard. Nicolette stood on the sidewalk, hand looped loosely through Aiden's. She could feel his pulse under his skin, steady, grounded, while hers tapped a quick staccato. They had been working toward this night for weeks, their days braided between contracts, paint fumes, fundraising drives, and endless runs to the hardware store. But now it was here, the moment when a dream stopped being a blueprint and became something you could step into. The building had been a storage room once. Tonight, it had a name: the listening room. The letters on the sign above the door were painted in a looping human script, nothing corporate, nothing cold, just a welcome in handwriting. Inside, the air hummed with the smell of fresh paint, polished wood, and anticipation. The walls wore a deep green that Nicolette had chosen. She called it patience green, the color of something that takes time to grow. On one wall, Aiden had hung a row of vinyl records like windows into other people's stories: Coltrane, Nina, Stevie, Lauren, Kendrick. Opposite that, shelves waited for the community's contributions: photos, poems, anything people wanted to leave behind. A small stage stood at the far end, flanked by mismatched but comfortable chairs. Fairy lights looped overhead, scattering soft gold onto the crowd gathering inside. Mrs. Ellenson from the community garden had brought a bowl of tomatoes the size of softballs and set them on a table beside cornbread, collards, and sweet tea. Kids darted between grown-up legs. Kai, Aiden's cousin, was at the DJ table, running sound checks with the precision of a man who understood both music and magic. Jamal, the headphone-wearing boy from Bronzeville, stood proudly beside him, helping wrap chords, his posture saying, "I belong here." By the door, a donation jar sat in plain sight. No pressure, no guilt, just an invitation. Nicolette smiled to herself. She'd already contributed far more than she'd admit, but tonight wasn't about her money. Tonight was about people seeing themselves reflected in a space that had been made for them. At exactly 7 o'clock, Aiden stepped onto the stage. The noise in the room softened until it felt like a collective breath being held. He scanned the crowd, faces from every corner of the neighborhood, people he'd driven, people who'd stopped him in the grocery store to ask how the studio was coming, even strangers drawn in by curiosity. He said, "Welcome," his voice low and sure. "This is the listening room, and this is yours." Applause rolled through the room, not polite, but grateful. He continued, "This is a place where your voice isn't an interruption, where your story doesn't have to fit into anyone else's agenda, where you can speak, sing, or sit in silence and still belong." The applause this time was louder, warmer. Someone shouted "Amen" from the back, and a ripple of laughter followed. He introduced the first performer, a woman in her 50s named Miss Charlene, who stepped up in a floral dress and read a poem about raising daughters to be strong without hardening. Her words landed like soft stones in still water, each one sending a ripple through the room. People nodded. A few wiped their eyes. Next came a teenager who rapped about algebra like it was his first love, and somehow made the whole room cheer for fractions. Then a man with a limp and a harmonica sang a blues so clean it made the donation jar overflow. Through it all, Nicolette stood near the doorway, letting herself watch instead of lead. She saw shy people edge closer to the stage, saw strangers strike up conversations, saw kids dancing in the aisles without anyone telling them to sit down. She realized this wasn't just a room, it was a permission slip. Halfway through the night, someone called her name from the stage. She froze. Aiden stood beside the mic, a quiet challenge in his eyes. He said, "Someone signed you up, and I think you should take it." The crowd turned toward her. Her first instinct was to decline,
to laugh it off and say she was just here to support. But Aiden wasn't pushing. He was holding the door open. She walked to the stage slowly, the mic warm in her hand. The fairy lights overhead blurred for a moment before coming back into focus. She began, "I used to think that being better than everyone else was the only way to be safe. I thought if I could stay ahead, sharper, faster, harder, no one could touch me." A few murmurs of recognition rose from the crowd. She said, "Then I met a man who drove me to the places I was avoiding, and he showed me that love isn't leverage. It's not a crowbar to move people where you want them. Love is a door, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk through." Applause broke out. Clapping, snapping fingers, a few cheers. The sound wrapped around her like a blanket she didn't know she needed. When she stepped down, a woman in hospital scrubs hugged her and whispered, "I needed to hear that tonight." In the back, Ms. Baxter, her mother, stood with her purse under one arm, pretending to adjust it while wiping at her eyes. Later, she would take Aiden's hands in both of hers and say, "You are good for my daughter," in a voice that sounded almost like a blessing. As the night wound down, the crowd thinned to a lingering circle. That's when a boy, barely taller than the mic stand, stepped forward. He looked nervous, glancing back at a woman Nicolette recognized instantly, the mother from the storm blackout night. The boy cleared his throat. He asked, "Can I sing something?" Aiden knelt until they were eye level. He said, "We'd be honored." The boy sang. His voice was soft, uneven, not polished, but it was honest. And it was perfect. The room leaned in. When he finished, the applause was gentle, protective. His mother mouthed, "Thank you," toward Aiden and Nicolette, her eyes shining. It was a full-circle moment, and Nicolette felt it land in her chest, the proof that one night, one act of stepping toward instead of away, could change everything. After the last chairs were stacked and the lights dimmed, she and Aiden stepped outside. The street smelled like summer's last page. A single street lamp above them hummed faintly, holding steady this time. She said, "I love you." The words had been building for weeks, and now they came out like they'd been waiting for permission. Aiden looked at her like she was both the question and the answer. He said, "I love you not because you're better than everyone, because you're you with me." She laughed, the unguarded laugh she'd discovered in Bronzeville, and rested her forehead against his cheek. She said, "Tomorrow, and the next day, and the next." He said, "We'll drive, we'll detour, we'll arrive." They kissed under the streetlight that had once gone dark on them. This time the light held steady. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rehearsed for a storm that might never come, and they didn't flinch.